Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The rain that night was unusually loud, as if heaven itself was trying to scream a warning. Inside the mansion, quietness blanketed every corridor. The billionaire was away in Dubai on a 4-day business trip, his return scheduled for the weekend. His daughter, Zara, 18, brilliant and innocent, had returned from campus the day before for a short break. The house staff adored her. They called her Little Madam and respected her privacy. That night, however, a familiar face entered the gates, Pastor Raymond. The guards didn't hesitate. "Ogre Raymond." "Welcome, sir," they said with cheerful reverence. He smiled, raised his Bible slightly in greeting, and walked in as though he lived there. His footsteps echoed down the hallway as he made his way to the guest lounge. No one questioned his visit. After all, he was family. But beneath his religious smile and tailored ibada was a hunger that had festered in darkness. He had come for one reason, and it wasn't prayer. He found her asleep, face resting gently on her forearm, the glow of her table lamp washing over her soft features. On her reading table was a chilled bottle of malt, already half drunk. That was his opening. Slowly, he brought out a small sachet of white powder from his wallet. His hands didn't shake. He had done this before. He poured it in gently, watched it fizz faintly, and waited. Then he tapped on the door, his voice calm. "Zara, my dear, I came to drop something for your father. Are you okay?" Half asleep, she stirred and opened the door. "Uncle, what are you doing here?" she asked, yawning. He smiled warmly. "Don't worry, your dad knows. I just stopped by. Come, sit. Drink something. You look tired." She reached for her drink, unaware of the storm inside the bottle. She sipped it slowly, her face relaxing. Moments later, her limbs grew heavy, her thoughts hazy. "Uncle, I think I'm dizzy," she mumbled. He caught her gently, laid her on the bed like a wolf tucking in its prey, and locked the door behind him. What followed was darkness, silence, stolen innocence, and breathless betrayal. He whispered Bible verses to himself as he committed the very sin those verses condemned. The room was filled with the scent of her lotion, the weight of her dreams, dreams that would now rot in shame. When he finished, he sat beside her for a few seconds, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. She murmured softly in sleep, lost in sedation, unaware of the devil beside her. He stood up, straightened his ibada, and walked out as if nothing had happened. "God forgive me," he whispered. But the heavens had seen, and they were not silent. Morning crept in slowly. The sunlight pierced through the curtains, falling across Zara's face. She stirred, her eyes fluttered open, and a strange ache wrapped around her lower body. Something was wrong. Her bed felt different, as if her soul had left and only a shell remained. She sat up slowly and felt wetness. Pulling off her covers, she froze. Blood. A faint smear across her thighs, her sheets soaked in dread. Her hands trembled as she touched herself, searching for pain, an answer, anything. Her memories were foggy, scattered. She remembered drinking the malt, her uncle's voice, but nothing after that. Panic clutched her throat. Her chest tightened. No scream came, only breathless gasps. Zara stumbled into the bathroom, stripped her clothes, and turned on the shower. She scrubbed until her skin hurt, tears mixing with the water, but the shame wouldn't go away. She cleaned her room with robotic precision, threw the sheets into the washing machine, changed her bed, washed her underwear. Every movement was mechanical, devoid of emotion. The maids asked if she was all right. She nodded without speaking. One of them asked if she was running a fever. Her eyes looked swollen. "I didn't sleep well," she whispered. Inside, she felt her world caving in. She sat on her bed, hugging her knees, staring at the floor for hours. Her mind screamed, but her lips were sealed. How do you tell your father that the man he trusts, the man who lays hands on the sick and cries during worship, had done this? She felt dirty, used, and cursed. She didn't know how to tell anyone, so she chose the only thing she could control: silence. Her father returned that night. "Daddy's girl," he exclaimed cheerfully. She forced a smile, ran into his arms, and let him hug her. But the hug didn't feel the same. His warmth only reminded her of what had been taken. "You okay?" he asked, rubbing her back gently. "You look tired." She nodded. "School stress," she lied. That night, he watched her eat slowly, barely touching her food. She excused herself early. In her room, she stared at her ceiling, whispering prayers she didn't understand anymore. She had once believed in purity, in protection, in family. Now, she wasn't even sure she believed in herself. Downstairs, her father sat alone, sensing something off. But he couldn't place it. Not yet. Years earlier, before pain stained their lives, Chief Ibuka and his wife Adora had been the image of perfect love. He, a self-made billionaire in his early 40s, had built his empire from scratch. Despite his immense wealth, he was humble, private, and known for his integrity. Adora, on the other hand, was the daughter of a respected pastor, beautiful, quiet, and faithful. She believed in God with a passion that humbled even the strongest men. Their marriage was one of balance. Where she knelt in prayer, he stood in action. He didn't fully believe in God, but he believed in her, and that was enough. Their home echoed with love, laughter, and gentle evenings spent watching the stars. Yet, for all their joy, one thing was missing: a child. For years, they tried. Hospitals, prayers, traditional treatments. Nothing worked. Adora wept in secret. She didn't blame her husband, and he never blamed her. He often told her, "If it's just you and me forever, I'm complete." But she longed to carry a child, to nurture a life within. They kept their struggles private. Only one man knew the depth of their pain: Ibuka's younger brother, Raymond. Raymond, the self-acclaimed man of God, often visited them with smiles, encouragement, and scripture. He was a university lecturer and part-time pastor, always seen fasting, praying, and preaching purity. But behind closed doors, he laughed with Ibuka about campus girls, and how he sorted grades with pleasure. "Ibuka, those girls are hungry, oh. Just show them small favor, and they lie down flat," he once joked. Ibuka, though amused at times, always warned him, "Raymond, don't let your appetite destroy you one day." Raymond would brush it off, wave his Bible, and smile. But Adora always felt uneasy around him. She never had evidence, just instincts. "Your brother loves the Bible, but I don't trust his eyes," she once told her husband. "You're just being too sensitive," Ibuka had replied. Yet he promised to watch closely. Then came the miracle Adora prayed for. She became pregnant. The news was like sunrise after a long night. The whole house rejoiced. Raymond knelt, prayed fervently, and fasted 3 days in celebration. Everyone was hopeful. But at 5 months, tragedy struck. A miscarriage. The silence in the house was unbearable. Adora stopped talking. Ibuka sat in the nursery for hours, staring at the untouched crib. Raymond comforted them, visited every day, even cooked. He became a pillar. And without knowing, they let him in, deep into their pain, and deeper into their lives. Raymond was the kind of man who knew how to play the game. With his gleaming wristwatch, perfectly ironed caftans, and a Bible always tucked under his arm, he was adored by church members, respected by students, and admired by naive women. He was never late to service, never missed a prayer meeting, and always led the loudest worship during vigils. But behind the polished mask was a man enslaved by lust and ego. He boasted about his conquests like they were medals of honor. Whenever he sat with his brother, he would laugh and narrate how easily university girls fell into his bed. "Ibuka, these girls will open legs for meat pie and an extra 5 marks, he'd chuckle, puffing on his chewing stick. "I don't even need to touch them sometimes. They offer themselves willingly. All these young girls want his attention, and I give it to them for a price." Ibuka would shake his head in disapproval, sipping from his wine glass, warning, "Raymond, this path won't end well. You're not just a lecturer, you're a minister. How will you answer to God?" But Raymond always shrugged off the warnings. "God understands. I'm still human," he'd say, chuckling with no sense of remorse. Ibuka didn't fully understand the depth of his brother's addiction. He thought it was simply arrogance, not evil. Though Adora occasionally expressed discomfort with Raymond's constant visits, and how his eyes lingered too long on female guests. Ibuka still saw his brother as flawed, but redeemable. After all, they shared blood. He believed Raymond's faith, however performative, had a limit. But Adora had sharper instincts. She once told her husband in a hushed tone, "There's something about your brother's spirit I don't trust. He is loud in worship, but I feel darkness in his silence." Ibuka brushed it off, trying not to create division between his wife and his brother. And that, unknowingly, was the door Raymond needed to walk deeper into their home. The more Ibuka ignored the subtle red flags, the stronger Raymond's influence became. He started visiting without notice. He would pray with Adora, lead home Bible studies, and even advise them on spiritual battles regarding childbirth. "Sometimes delay isn't from the womb, but from the spiritual realm," he'd declare, laying hands on Adora's belly with dramatic groans. And somehow, this display of support gained trust. To the outside world, Raymond was the kind of brother any man would be proud of, religious, educated, and available in times of sorrow. What no one knew was how cleverly he blended his sins behind his sermons. His wickedness was polished. When Ibuka finally gave him access to the home's prayer room, he'd go in, close the door, and pretend to be in spiritual warfare. But inside, he'd be watching old videos on his phone, some of his own victims, some of his fantasies. He began to crave control. His desire for purity was not for himself, but for the women he could rob it from. He was the kind of evil that kneels at the altar, but fantasizes about the usher. And slowly, he had convinced the entire household that he was safe. Because what better disguise than the cloak of holiness? The day Adora discovered she was pregnant for the first time felt like the heavens had parted. She screamed in joy, tears rolling down her face. As she clutched the test, stripped to her chest. She knelt in the sitting room, thanking God for answering her prayers after years of trying. Ibuka, upon hearing the news, had lifted her up in a tight embrace, spinning her around like they were newlyweds again. It was a miracle. They cried together, danced in the living room, and knelt in prayer, Ibuka for the first time in years. Even the staff celebrated. Raymond showed up that evening with bottles of wine, kneeling in front of Adora and laying his hands on her belly. "This child is God's reward for your faith," he said, his voice shaking as if overwhelmed. "I will be fasting for this baby. 7 days straight." His words were convincing, and they believed him. No one questioned his intentions, not even Adora, who still felt an invisible discomfort in his presence. But she buried it under joy. The months that followed were filled with careful preparation. Ibuka read parenting books, Adora knitted socks for the unborn baby, and Raymond became a daily visitor, bringing fruits, scriptures, and prayers. At night, Ibuka would place his hand on his wife's belly and whisper, "Daddy's waiting. So, is Mummy. Don't keep us too long." It was the most peaceful season of their marriage. Adora glowed, and Ibuka softened into a man of hope. But it all came crashing down one evening. Adora was alone in the house when she felt the pain, sharp, unrelenting. She screamed until the maid rushed in. Blood was everywhere. By the time Ibuka arrived at the hospital, the doctor's face already told the story. "We lost the baby," he said gently. Adora sat in bed, weeping into her palms, her voice gone. Ibuka, destroyed, collapsed to his knees beside her, hugging her waist like a child. No. The house turned into a mausoleum. The crib remained untouched. The baby clothes stayed folded. Ibuka stopped going to work. Adora stopped eating. Raymond became their anchor. He would cook, pray, sing worship songs, and encourage them daily. "God gives and takes," he would say to Adora while holding her hands. "But he's not done with you yet." His presence began to feel essential. He took charge of family devotions, began leading private prayer sessions with Adora in the living room, and started spending nights over in the guest room. One evening, he brought a bottle of anointing oil and told Adora, "Let's pray together in the prayer room while Ibuka rests." And so they prayed, she with sincerity, he with something darker in his heart. The miscarriage had opened a gate, not just a sorrow, but access. And Raymond stepped into it like a serpent in a garden, unnoticed and welcomed. The grief had cracked Ibuka's defenses, and in the process, Raymond found fertile ground to sow deceit under the banner of faith. What began as brotherly support evolved into spiritual leadership in their home. Raymond began organizing mini vigils in the sitting room, placing a giant crucifix on the wall, and lighting candles every midnight. "We must not allow the devil to steal from this family again," he declared one night. Ibuka, hungry for something to hold on to, started joining. It began with just listening. Then he began kneeling, then praying, then fasting. For the first time in his adult life, the billionaire wept openly during a vigil. He prayed for a child, for strength, for hope. Raymond beamed with pride, not because his brother had found God, but because he had now completely dropped his guard. He had never felt more welcomed in the home, more trusted, more powerful. Adora noticed her husband's transformation with mixed feelings. She was happy he was finally embracing faith, but she felt something strange about Raymond's growing presence. There were days he stared at her for too long, or held her hand during prayer a little too tightly. She confided in her husband once more, "Ibuka, it's good he's helping us, but maybe he should rest now. Maybe we need space again." Ibuka sighed. "Ada, the man has been our rock. He's been more helpful than most pastors. Let's not push him away when we need his prayers." She nodded, but her instincts remained unsettled. And Raymond noticed. He noticed how her eyes didn't linger when he entered. He noticed her reluctance to pray alone with him. But he was patient. Evil always is. He started focusing more on Ibuka, giving him scriptures to memorize, spiritual books, and even assigned fasting days. "You are the head of this home. If you carry faith, your wife will follow," Raymond declared. And slowly, Ibuka surrendered to that. Then it happened again. Adora missed her period. The tests came back positive. Another child was growing inside her. This time, the celebration was quieter, more cautious, but no less joyful. Raymond again fasted. He prayed. He wept. But not for the baby. He wept for power. With each passing month, he became more embedded. He chose names for the unborn child. He told the maids what prayers to play on the radio. He even appointed himself guardian of the womb. And no one saw the absurdity of it because he was now Pastor Raymond, redeemed, trusted, and family. Only Adora still watched him with wary eyes. But her voice was tired, her body was heavy, and her hope was focused solely on delivering a healthy baby. If only she had known that the same man who wept beside her would one day weep as he betrayed her memory, through the child she died giving life to. This time, they kept it secret. No long prayers in public, no excited phone calls to distant relatives, no church testimony. Just quiet, cautious gratitude. Adora's second pregnancy was wrapped in silent reverence, as though speaking too loudly might frighten the miracle away. The staff were told gently, and only the closest friends of the family knew. It was Ibuka's idea. After the devastation of the miscarriage, he feared hope might break them again if handled carelessly. But Adora smiled more this time, and her glow returned. Her wounds swelled slowly, carrying not just a child, but the healing of a wounded home. Ibuka had completely transformed. Every morning, he laid hands on her belly and prayed, sometimes with tears in his eyes. He no longer needed Raymond's guidance. He had grown his own voice in prayer, soft, firm, and desperate. "Please," he whispered to God one night, his head resting on Adora's stomach. "Just let her live. Let her live, and let the child live." Raymond, however, was losing the spotlight. As Adora progressed in her pregnancy, Ibuka no longer leaned on him for spiritual interpretation. He didn't stop him from visiting, but he was more guarded. "We're good, Ray," he'd often say politely. "Thank you for everything you've done, but I think I just want to lead my home from here." That statement bruised Raymond's ego more than any insult could have. He smiled politely in response, but inside he boiled. No longer the spiritual shepherd of the house, he started pulling away. His visits grew fewer, but his eyes watched everything silently, especially Adora. There was a strange bitterness in him now, like something denied its throne. He had once felt like the head of the household. Now, he was just the tolerated uncle again. Adora, still careful, remained gracious. She thanked him when he dropped off prayer books or fruits, but her eyes never softened. She had sensed the darkness long ago. What she didn't know was how deep that darkness truly ran. Then came the 8th month. Adora's movements slowed. She tired easily. The doctor recommended rest, no stress, no visits. So the house emptied gradually. The baby was healthy, but her blood pressure was high. Ibuka reduced his business trips, stayed home more, and read Bible verses aloud while rubbing oil on her feet. They would sing together in the evenings, simple songs of worship and hope. On one of those nights, while humming softly, Adora looked at him with the deepest love and whispered, "If I don't make it, promise me you'll love this child like you love me." Ibuka held her tightly and said, "Don't say that. You'll be fine. Both of you will be." But her words haunted him. He kept imagining the worst, praying even harder. Raymond had stopped visiting altogether. But deep in his office on campus, he still watched. The baby was coming, and with it, a shift none of them would be prepared for. The morning of delivery began like any other. Adora woke early, bathed slowly, and braided her hair quietly while Ibuka watched her from the doorway. She smiled at him and said, "Today, our lives change again." They kissed gently, and within the hour, contractions began. Everything moved quickly. Ibuka drove her to their private hospital, hand gripping hers tightly through each wave of pain. Nurses moved with urgency, but no panic. "She's strong," the doctor assured him. "She'll be fine." But as the hours passed, something shifted. Her screams became strained, her body trembled, and her grip weakened. Ibuka was asked to step out of the room. It wasn't the plan. She was meant to give birth in calmness, surrounded by soft music and gentle voices. But instead, he stood outside the door, hearing alarms, panicked nurses, and doctors barking orders. Something had gone wrong. The baby's heartbeat dropped. Adora was losing too much blood. Her cervix wasn't dilating enough, and when it finally did, her pressure spiked uncontrollably. By the time they performed an emergency operation, she was fading. The baby came out crying, a girl healthy and loud. But Adora's eyes were already closing. As Ibuka held his daughter for the first time, another hand, his wife's, grew cold in his other. "She's gone," the doctor said quietly. "We tried everything." Time stopped. He looked at the newborn in his arms, still crying, still pink and alive. And then he looked at the bed where his wife lay, the woman who had been his world, his rock, his reason to believe again. His knees buckled. He dropped to the floor, holding the child like a fragile flame and sobbing in a way that cracked through the hospital walls. The funeral was a blur. Hundreds came, some out of love, others out of curiosity. Ibuka wore black, his eyes hollow. He held his daughter like treasure. Her name was Zara, princess, because Adora had once said if she ever had a girl, that would be her name. Raymond showed up at the burial, weeping theatrically, holding his Bible close to his chest, preaching about life and death. But Ibuka couldn't even look at him. He had lost the only woman who ever truly knew him. But he had her reflection in his arms, their child. That night, holding Zara, Ibuka made a vow. "I will never remarry. I will never let harm come to you. I will raise you with everything I am." And with that promise, a new chapter began. A father and a daughter. No mother. No outsider. Just them. And far away, in the shadows, Raymond watched. The girl he had once anointed in her mother's womb would soon become the obsession of a man who had never learned how to love anything he couldn't defile. Fatherhood changed Ibuka in ways even he didn't expect. The billionaire who once spent his nights in boardrooms now rocked a crib with tired eyes and hummed lullabies instead of reading contracts. Zara became his reason for breathing. Every single day, he saw Adora in her daughter's face, the curve of her lips, the sharpness of her cheekbones, the quiet intelligence in her eyes. He took his vow seriously. No nannies touched her without his approval. Every birthday was celebrated privately, each one a milestone of gratitude. She became the heart of his mansion, not the gold chandeliers, not the empire he built, but this little girl who crawled, walked, talked, and smiled like her mother. Even when he traveled, he never left for long. Zara always came first. He never remarried, never entertained advances, and remained loyal to the memory of the woman who gave him both pain and purpose in one breath. Zara, for her part, grew into a wonder. By age 5, she could already read beyond her grade level. By 10, she spoke with the poise of a woman twice her age. She loved music, painting, and books. She asked thoughtful questions and laughed freely. She never knew how much pain her father carried behind every smile. To her, he was invincible. He was the one who tucked her in, helped with assignments, prayed with her every night, and told her stories of a woman named Adora, her mother, her angel. By the time she turned 18, she was a vision, dark-skinned, graceful, with her mother's beauty and her father's intelligence. Her father often looked at her from a distance and whispered, "Adora, I see you." She had dreams of becoming a child psychologist, determined to help children navigate pain she never even knew she was born from. And when she got admitted into the University of Enugu, her father wept quietly, proud and terrified. The same university Raymond lectured in. The same university he had prowled for years. Ibuka hesitated at first. "Are you sure about this school?" he asked gently. She smiled. "Dad, it's close to home. You'll see me every week. And Uncle Raymond is there. You always said he was a good man." Ibuka paused, his face unreadable. "I did," he said slowly. "A long time ago." He hadn't seen Raymond in years. After Adora's death, their relationship quietly dissolved. But out of respect, Raymond was invited for birthdays and major events. He always came bearing gifts, blessing the child, and leaving early. But now, she would be in his territory. "Just be careful," Ibuka said, kissing her forehead. "Stay focused. If you ever need me for anything, don't hesitate." And with that, he released her into the world, not knowing that the same evil that took his wife would soon circle back, aiming to finish what it started. Zara stepped into university life with the kind of presence that turned heads without trying. She wasn't just beautiful. She was composed, articulate, and moved with a grace that reminded people of royalty. Even in her modest outfits, she stood out in lecture halls, cafeterias, and quiet library corners. Her lecturers admired her brilliance. Her peers admired her elegance. But Zara never let the attention distract her. Her focus was clear. She wanted to graduate with distinction, build her future, and make her father proud. She often told friends, "My mother gave her life for me. I don't have the luxury of mediocrity." Her weekends were mostly spent at home. She'd sit with her father, share stories about campus life, and they'd laugh like old friends. To her, he was more than a parent. He was her compass, her comfort, and her safe place in a world filled with noise. It wasn't long before her uncle, Pastor Dr. Raymond, learned of her presence on campus. His colleagues spoke of her brilliance. Some, unaware of the connection, gossiped about the new beauty in psychology class. The moment he saw her walking into a departmental seminar one morning, something shifted in him. His breath caught. His heart raced. She looked too much like Adora. Her walk, her voice, even the way she furrowed her brows when focused. But unlike Adora, Zara was younger, untamed by time, and within reach. He called her into his office the next day under the pretense of academic mentorship. "Zara, look how big you've grown," he said, hugging her too tightly for too long. "Your mother would be so proud." She smiled politely. "Thank you, Uncle." That day, he gifted her a devotional book and said, "My door is always open to you." Zara, raised to respect elders and trust family, saw nothing suspicious. She visited his office sometimes, mostly to drop messages from her father or ask school-related questions. Raymond would often cancel meetings when she arrived. He'd offer her drinks, biscuits, or fruits. Once he told her, "You're the only true flower in this rotten university. I'm so proud you're mine." She laughed, brushing off the awkwardness. But the compliments became weirder. "Do you know if you weren't my niece, men would line up for you?" he once said with a chuckle. Zara frowned, but didn't respond. When she told her father about the joke during a weekend visit, he paused. "What exactly did he say?" She repeated it. Ibuka's face tightened slightly. but he said nothing. Just stay focused, Zara, he finally said. Don't let compliments distract you. Zara nodded, unaware that beneath her uncle's smile was a hunger he had fought for years, but was now ready to feed again. As weeks passed, Raymond's obsession deepened. What started as lingering gazes became secret photographs on his phone. He'd zoom in on pictures she took with classmates, pausing to study her smile, her eyes, her legs. At night, in his dark office, he would stare at them under the illusion of prayer, whispering twisted requests for forgiveness he never truly meant. He began visiting her hostel, claiming to bring food or check on her behalf of her father. Your dad worries, he'd say. Zara remained cordial, but increasingly cautious. She noticed how he never visited other students, never brought gifts to anyone else. Once, he gave her a necklace. This belonged to your mother, he lied. She would have wanted you to have it. It was a manipulation meant to strengthen emotional ties, to move closer into her trust. She thanked him, but never wore it. Then came the small touches, a hand brushing against her arm for too long, a palm resting slightly too low on her back during group photos. Zara's discomfort grew. She told one of her roommates about it, who advised, maybe that's just how he is. Some older men don't know boundaries. But Zara knew something was off. One day, after a tutorial session he insisted on attending, he walked her to her hostel gate and said, Zara, if I were your age, do you know how I would have loved you? The air turned cold. She turned to him, eyebrows raised. Uncle, I think you're joking too much these days, she said firmly. I don't like it. He laughed awkwardly and said, you know I love you. But fine, I'll be careful. That night, Zara lay awake. Something in her had shifted. The trust she had in him as an uncle was now frayed, delicate and cracking. Raymond panicked slightly after that. He began messaging her less. He tried to act distant again. But the damage was done. Inside him, the seed had already grown roots. He fantasized about her daily, prayed while picturing her, and told himself it was just admiration. When he heard Ibuka would be traveling for a summit in Dubai, he smiled. He called the house to check in, and was told Zara would be home alone for a few days. Perfect, he whispered. This was his opportunity, a chance to finally taste what had consumed his mind. All he needed was timing, access, and trust. And he had all three. He began planning his visit like a holy mission, not as an uncle, not even as a man of God, but as a predator who had disguised himself too well for far too long. The weekend Zara returned home, she was happy. It had been a stressful semester, and her room was her sanctuary. She dropped her bag on her bed, changed into her house gown, and walked barefoot across the familiar marble floor. The staff welcomed her warmly. Little madam, you've grown again, one of the maids said. Zara smiled, hugged them, and settled in. That night, she video-called her father. You're glowing, he said, his voice filled with pride. Maybe rest suits you. Or maybe it's your cooking I miss, she teased. They laughed. She didn't tell him anything about Raymond. She didn't want to spoil the peace. She had decided to just avoid him. Distance would make everything easier. But fate had other plans. The next day, Raymond called the mansion. Is Chief around? He asked the security. No, sir, Olga traveled. He'll be back by Sunday. I'm coming over. I want to drop something for Zara. When he arrived, the gates opened without hesitation. Raymond was family. He parked and greeted the staff casually, carrying a small bag and a smile. Where's Zara? He asked. In her room upstairs, sir. He walked slowly up the marble staircase, heart pounding. On the way, he passed the kitchen, picked a bottle of malt from a fridge, and quietly reached into his pocket for a sachet. He poured it in, watched it dissolve, and smiled. Upstairs, he knocked gently. Zara, half asleep, opened the door. Uncle, she asked, confused. I came to check on you, he said warmly, and brought you something cold. She hesitated. I'm just waking up. Thank you, let me keep it for later. Just sip a little, he urged. It will help you relax. She took the bottle out of courtesy and drank slowly. Within minutes, her legs weakened. Her words slurred. Uncle, I feel strange. She collapsed slowly into his arms. He closed the door, locked it quietly, and stood over her. "Forgive me," he whispered. "This isn't what I planned. But you're just too perfect." Then, like a man possessed, he stripped her innocence. The daughter of his brother, the child he once blessed in prayer, the girl who had never known a man. When he finished, he sat beside her, heart racing, wiping his sweat with his handkerchief. "I'm sorry," he whispered, not to her, but to his own guilt. "But I had to." He redressed her, tidied the room slightly, and walked out calmly like a visitor who had just dropped off groceries. The house staff waved him goodbye. "Greet Olga for us," they said. He nodded, drove out, and the gate closed behind him. Behind that gate lay a girl whose world had just shattered, and had no idea yet what had been taken from her. The house was still. Zara didn't wake until late into the next morning. When she did, her body ached in ways she didn't understand. Her sheets were wrinkled and damp with cold sweat. Her head pounded, and her mouth was dry like sandpaper. She sat up slowly, eyes scanning her room, heart beating erratically. Something was off. She looked down at herself. Her wrapper was loose around her waist, her top stained with what seemed like malt or juice. But it wasn't until she stood that the dread truly set in. There was a soreness between her thighs, deep, raw, unfamiliar. She staggered to the bathroom, stripped slowly, and stared at herself in the mirror. There was bruising along her inner thighs, faint but undeniable. She touched herself carefully, then recoiled. Blood. Not menstruation blood. Something darker, out of place. Her breath caught in her throat. She checked the toilet, the sink, her towels. It felt like her entire room had become a puzzle she didn't know how to solve. The next hour passed in a haze. She changed her bedsheets, washed them, cleaned the bathroom floor, and scrubbed her own skin until it turned red. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Her mind hadn't accepted the possibility. She paced around her room like a trapped animal, chewing her nails, whispering fragments of questions to herself. Did I sleepwalk? Did someone? No, no one came, right? But deep in her bones, she knew. There had been someone. The malt. The dizziness. The blackout. She remembered opening the door to Raymond. She remembered drinking. Everything after that was fog. She collapsed onto her bed, curled into a fetal position, and let the silence crawl over her. That evening, when one of the housemaids came knocking, she didn't respond. Zara, the woman, called. Olga called. He said he'll be home tomorrow. Should I prepare anything for you? Zara didn't answer. She remained motionless, face buried in her pillow, pretending to sleep. Because if she woke up to face it, she would have to say the words. And she couldn't. When Ibuka returned the next day, he noticed immediately. Zara didn't run to hug him at the gate like she usually did. She didn't chat with him during dinner. She barely smiled. Are you sick? He asked, touching her forehead. No, she whispered. I'm just tired. He watched her eat 2 spoonfuls of rice, then push her plate away. That night, he stood at her doorway, watching her as she sat on the floor of her room, legs pulled to her chest, staring blankly ahead. Zara, what's going on? He asked, kneeling beside her. Talk to me. She looked at him with tired eyes, but said nothing. Just rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, I'm okay. Ibuka didn't believe her. Something in his spirit stirred, a faint voice whispering that something had gone horribly wrong in his absence. And for the first time since Adaora's death, fear returned to his heart, not for himself, but for his daughter. In the days that followed, Zara became a ghost in her own home. She barely spoke unless spoken to. Her laughter, once the melody of the mansion, had vanished completely. Even the staff noticed the change. Is she depressed? One maid whispered to another. Maybe something happened at school. But Ibuka knew this was different. He watched her sit in the garden for hours, just staring into space. She stopped playing music, stopped painting, stopped calling her friends. She slept more, but her face always looked tired, like she had been fighting battles in her dreams. One evening, he tried to make her favorite meal, catfish pepper soup with boiled yam. When he placed it in front of her, she looked up, tried to smile, and whispered, Thank you, Daddy. But she didn't eat it. That was when he knew. Whatever had happened had touched the core of her soul. And it wasn't something time would heal on its own. Zara often found herself replaying fragments of memory that didn't exist. She would sit on her bed, close her eyes, and try to fill in the blanks. She questioned her own sanity. Maybe it was a hallucination. Maybe she had imagined the bruises. Maybe nothing happened. But the body never lies. Her body remembered something her mind had buried. She started flinching whenever anyone touched her shoulder. She began locking her door even during the day. Her nights became war zones. She'd wake up breathless, heart pounding, clutching her bed sheets like they were lifelines. Once she tried to cry into the pillow and scream, but no sound came. Her throat tightened, her chest ached, and all she could do was curl up and shake. She thought about telling her father, but then she pictured his face. The pain, the fury, the heartbreak. She couldn't do that to him. He had already lost so much. Ibuka began to investigate quietly. He called her friends. He spoke with one of her lecturers. He even checked her academic portal. Everything looked fine. But he wasn't fooled. He began reviewing the CCTV footage from the compound during his trip. He didn't expect to find anything until he did. A clip from 3 nights before. Raymond arriving at 8:43 p.m., walking through the living room and into the kitchen, picking a malt bottle, pausing, then slipping something into it. Ibuka froze. His blood turned to ice. He rewound it, watched it again, and again, and again. He watched Raymond walk up the stairs, and he never saw him come down until over an hour later. The camera facing Zara's hallway was off. She had requested privacy months ago, but the damage was clear. Ibuka stood slowly from the viewing room, his body trembling, his vision narrowing. The voice in his spirit was now a scream. Your daughter has been defiled, and the devil wore your brother's face. Ibuka paced the living room all night. Rage sat like fire beneath his skin, threatening to erupt at every breath. He replayed the footage in his mind, over and over, each time more unbearable. He wanted to break something, know everything. But more than that, he wanted to hold Zara, to protect her, to take away her pain. Around 5 a.m., he stood at her door. He knocked gently. Zara, he whispered. It's Daddy. Please, can I come in? No answer. He knocked again. Still silence. He twisted the knob slowly and stepped inside. She was curled under her blanket, trembling slightly. He walked to her bed and sat beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. She flinched. He froze. His heart broke again. Zara, he whispered, I know something happened. I saw the camera. I know who came into the house. Her entire body stiffened. He waited. And finally, she began to cry. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her sobs were raw, violent, from a place deeper than grief. Ibuka held her, tears falling from his eyes, his hand gently stroking her hair. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I should have protected you. I should have seen it. She sobbed harder. I didn't want to ruin everything, she finally gasped. You were so happy that I was home. I didn't want to be the reason you broke again. He cupped her face gently. You are never the reason, Zara. Never. Do you understand me? You are my reason for living. They sat like that for an hour, 2 broken souls trying to stitch themselves back together. But the fire inside Ibuka had found direction now. It had a name, a target, and a consequence. His brother had crossed a line that could never be forgiven, and justice would come, not in words, but in blood. Later that day, Ibuka left the house quietly, telling the staff not to disturb Zara. He wore a simple shirt and jeans, not his usual agbada. He didn't call the police. He didn't tell friends. He only drove, calmly, steadily, to Raymond's house. When Raymond opened the door and saw him, he smiled. Brother, I was just thinking about you. Ibuka didn't speak. He stepped inside, closed the door, and locked it. Did you think I wouldn't find out? He asked, voice low, almost kind. Raymond blinked. What are you talking of? But the punch came before the lie. And then another. And another. Ibuka beat him with a fury that came from grief, betrayal, and love for a daughter who didn't deserve this nightmare. By the time he was done, Raymond wasn't breathing. Ibuka knelt on the floor beside the bloodied body, looked at his shaking hands, and whispered, You will never hurt anyone again. The silence that followed the storm inside Raymond's house was heavy, dense with guilt, grief, and irreversible action. Ibuka stood over his brother's lifeless body, blood staining his hands and shirt, chest rising and falling like a man who had just run from hell. But he hadn't run. He had walked straight into it and stood still while fire consumed everything around him. The room was in chaos, shattered glass, overturned chairs, the TV smashed from the impact of Raymond's head. He looked at the man who once shared his mother's womb, his father's name, and whispered through clenched teeth, "You wore the same face as me and touched my child." For a brief moment, he felt nothing. No regret, no panique, just emptiness. The kind of emptiness that comes after war when the final bullet has been fired and there's nothing left to destroy. Ibuka didn't run. He didn't clean up the scene or attempt to hide the truth. He sat on the living room floor beside his brother's body and waited. When the police arrived 2 hours later, tipped off by a concerned neighbor who heard the crashing and screaming, they found him seated, calm, eyes red but dry. "I did it," he said plainly. "He raped my daughter. I found out. I confronted him. And I couldn't stop myself." The officers looked around in stunned silence. This wasn't a gang member or criminal. This was Chief Ibuka, philanthropist, respected businessman, pillar of the community. But none of that mattered anymore. They placed him in handcuffs. He didn't resist. As they led him out of the compound, he glanced up at the sky. It had started to rain. He welcomed it, letting it wash over his face like it might cleanse something even justice couldn't. News spread like wildfire. Billionaire kills brother in violent outburst. Headline screamed. But the true story was quieter, buried in court transcripts and CCTV footage submitted by Ibuka's lawyer. The prosecution wanted a murder charge, but the defense was clear. This was a man who snapped after discovering the rape of his only child. The case gained traction quickly. Women's rights activists began to murmur. Student survivors started sending anonymous letters. And then came the judge, a man whom Ibuka had once paid tuition for when he was still in university, a man whose wife Ibuka had helped get a job years ago. He listened carefully to every word of testimony. He watched the footage. And when the time came, he lowered his gavel and said, "Chief Ibuka is guilty of manslaughter, but the circumstances demand mercy. 6 months in prison with psychological evaluation. No record. No parole necessary." The courtroom gasped. And in the corner, Zara cried silently, not because her father was going to jail, but because the world had finally called what happened to her by its name. The first week in prison felt like walking through fire barefoot. Ibuka, once surrounded by mahogany boardrooms and servants, now slept on a metal frame with a thin mattress and shared a toilet with strangers. But he never complained. He didn't seek preferential treatment. He didn't want to be Chief Ibuka inside those walls. He wanted to be a man serving a sentence, a father repenting for the one life he took in defense of the one he vowed to protect. Fellow inmates initially gave him space, whispering his name in disbelief. "Nah, that big man wait kill him own brother," they'd say. But over time, they saw the quiet strength in him. He never raised his voice, never boasted, never played victim. And at night, they sometimes heard him weep, not loudly, but enough to let them know he was human. Zara, on the other hand, struggled to adjust to a world where her father wasn't just a phone call away. Every morning, she stared at the empty chair across the breakfast table and fought back tears. But she kept herself busy. She returned to school quietly, avoided the stares, ignored the whispers, and poured herself into her studies. Therapy helped, though some days it felt like talking to a stranger through a tunnel of shame. She began journaling, drawing again, and sometimes, on very fragile mornings, she'd open the wardrobe her father kept of her mother's belongings and just sit beside it, breathing in the scent of a woman she never met but felt wrapped around her soul. Her healing was slow, messy, but real. And every week, she visited the prison. She'd bring food, books, and sit across from her father, their eyes meeting with 1,000 unspoken emotions between them. It was during one of those visits, for months into a sentence, that Zara held her father's hand across the metal table and whispered, "Thank you for fighting for me. I didn't want you to get hurt, but now I understand." I love you, Daddy. And for the first time since the trial, Ibuka let himself cry without restraint. His hands shook. His shoulders slumped. I would do it again, he said, even if it cost me everything. When his 6 months ended, the wardens shook his hand as he walked out. No fanfare. No reporters. Just him, dressed in a simple shirt and trousers, stepping into the sunlight. And there she was, Zara, waiting beside the car, holding his coat, smiling. He hugged her tight, burying his face in her neck like a soldier returning from war. They didn't speak on the drive home. Words weren't needed. They had survived. Home wasn't the same, but it was still home. When they walked into the mansion, the staff gathered quietly, some in tears. No one spoke of the trial. No one asked questions. They just welcomed him back like a king who had been wounded, but returned stronger. Ibuka went straight to his wife's memorial portrait and stood before it. I kept my vow, Adora, he whispered. I protected her. Zara stood beside him, her hand slipping into his. The silence between them was sacred. Over the next few days, life resumed slowly. Ibuka resumed work remotely, kept his affairs private, and rarely stepped out in public. Not out of shame, but peace. The man who once built empires had learned that sometimes true strength was choosing quiet after the storm. Zara's room became her sanctuary again, her books, her art, her new boundaries. And her healing became the seed for her future. Zara no longer looked over her shoulder in fear. She walked differently now, taller, stronger, not because she wasn't wounded, but because she had chosen not to remain broken. Her therapist once said, healing isn't about forgetting. It's about reclaiming the parts of you that were stolen. And she had begun to do just that. She joined a small women's group in her department, quietly mentoring freshmen and helping them set academic and emotional boundaries. Rumors about Raymond's past slowly started surfacing. A few female students, who once felt powerless, found their courage through Zara's story. He touched me too, one whispered after class. I thought no one would believe me. And for every confession that came, Zara grew stronger, not because justice had already been served, but because her truth had lit a path for others. Ibuka watched her from a distance, sometimes, and marveled at her resilience. She's stronger than both of us, he once told one of his staff. She has her mother's soul and my fire. They began doing things together again, cooking, jogging in the estate, reading books. One day, while pruning flowers in the garden, Zara turned to him and said, I'm ready to move forward, but I'll never forget, and I don't want you to forget either. He nodded. I won't, he said. But forgetting was never the point. Living, that's the point. And so they lived. With scars, yes, but also with seeds. Seeds of wisdom, boundaries, and a love that had walked through fire and came out unburnt. Their story had shifted from survival to rebirth. And though the wound would always ache in quiet moments, it would never again be the reason they couldn't smile. The death of Pastor Dr. Raymond had stirred whispers, but no one dared speak too loudly. Until now. With the case closed, Ibuka freed, and Zara slowly rebuilding her life, the silence on campus began to crack. A female student named Amara, once a quiet accounting major, posted anonymously on a student board. He once touched me too, and threatened to fail me if I told anyone. It was just one message, but it lit a fire. Within days, other voices followed. Former and current students, even women from other departments, shared their stories of uncomfortable advances, late-night office meetings, and grades given in exchange for silence. He always had a Bible open, one wrote, but his hands were never holy. A wave of truth surged across the university. Raymond, once celebrated as a father of faith and academic mentor, was now being revealed for what he truly was, a predator in clerical disguise. The university authorities couldn't deny it anymore. Though Raymond was dead, the weight of his crimes remained. Departmental heads issued formal apologies. Policies around lecturer-student interactions were revised. Private consultations were now recorded and reviewed. And though some tried to dismiss the movement as posthumous slander, too many testimonies had emerged to bury the truth again. A memorial wall was erected not for Raymond, but for the women whose dignity he violated and whose voices had long been dismissed. One quote, taken from Zara's own private journal entry, shared anonymously, was inscribed at the base. He wore a collar of faith, but beneath it was a throat full of wolves. We were never his lambs, we were his prey. But not anymore. Zara never spoke publicly about what happened. Not in lectures, not in interviews, not even during student-led protests. But her presence was enough. Girls walked taller when she passed. Her courage gave others theirs. Ibuka watched it all from afar, pride mixing with pain. Sometimes justice isn't a courtroom, he once said to Zara. Sometimes it's the echo that follows the truth. And truth had finally echoed, loud, unshakable, and undeniable. What Raymond tried to take from his niece, what he had stolen from so many others, had finally turned back against him. In the end, the justice system had served him posthumously through the voices he once silenced. It wasn't victory in the traditional sense. It wasn't fireworks or headlines. But it was justice. And that justice would ripple for years through every corridor of that university. Zara graduated with honors, just like her mother would have wanted. Her gown flowed behind her as she walked across the stage, head held high, eyes wet with quiet pride. Her name was called, and thunderous applause erupted. In the crowd sat Ibuka, dressed in a simple native attire, hands clasped, heart pounding. As she took her certificate, she looked out, found her father, and smiled. It was the same smile Adora had worn the day they bought their first house together, calm, sincere, full of light. Ibuka's eyes welled with tears. It wasn't just a graduation. It was a resurrection. His daughter had been buried under shame, silence, and pain. But here she was, rising again, not just alive, but victorious. After the ceremony, they walked through the campus slowly, stopping under the tree where she had once wept silently after lectures. I never thought I'd see this day, Zara said. There were nights I wished I didn't wake up. Ibuka placed his arm around her shoulders. You were never alone, Zara. Not even for a second. Your mother was with you. I was with you. And God, even in silence, he was with you too. She turned to him and nodded. Maybe. Or maybe we just had to survive long enough to become our own light. They laughed softly, not out of joy, but from the exhaustion of making it through the storm. And sometimes that kind of laughter is the most honest. No performance. No pretense. Just relief. That evening, as the sun set, they stood at Adora's grave. Zara placed her certificate at the headstone, knelt, and whispered, I did it, Mum. Ibuka stood behind her, hands in his pocket, eyes on the horizon. She's proud, he said. Wherever she is, she's singing. They didn't need to say more. The wind carried their silence like a hymn. And in that moment, everything made sense. Not the pain, not the loss, but the love that had carried them through it all. Raymond was gone. The past could not be rewritten. But their future, though scarred, was theirs to build. Together, father and daughter, two survivors, two souls bound not by tragedy, but by the fire that refined them. And as they walked back home under the soft glow of dusk, Zara smiled again. Not the one that hid pain, not the one that pretended, but the one her mother left behind. A smile born of ashes and stronger than blood. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.